Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Stan Grant. We're coming to you live from Sydney tonight. Nice to have everyone here in the room with us as well. Joining me on the panel, journalist and documentary filmmaker Yaara Melham, Anglican pastor and theologian Michael Jensen, company director and economist Melinda Cilento, New South Wales Liberal MP Jason Falinski, and from Canberra, ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr. Nice to have you all here.
I have been a member of the Sydney Anglican Church for most of my life, and I worked at a Christian school teaching English from 2017 to 2019, and I loved it. I think I was really good at my job, and I really enjoyed the colleagues and the relationships with students that I had. And in January this year, the school, which is actually in Mr. Falinski's electorate, fired me. And they fired me because I'm gay, and they fired me because they disagreed with me that you can be Christian and also live true to the biological realities of your sexuality or gender.
Can I just clarify that, Steph? Do you believe that you were fired because you were gay or because you could no longer teach the ethos or the doctrine of that school? Or had you offered to do just that?
I had offered to promote the school's ethos on sexuality, obviously notwithstanding things that I believed would be harmful to the students, but I did offer to back the school's position on a lot of things. However, the school wasn't willing to engage in debate on that, and they terminated my employment because of my sexuality and my belief that it's okay to be gay, that God's cool with it.
OK, I'll put that question to you, Michael Jensen. This goes to the nub of the issue, and that is where rights contest, where someone's right to their sexuality and right to employment contest with the religious freedom or the religious expression or the ethos of a religious school. How do we resolve that?
Well, it's complicated, right? What we've got to do in a liberal society, in open societies, we've got to make room for different types of view, different types of expression. One of the things with religious groups is that they're not just individuals; they're necessarily communities that express their ethos by shared statements of faith and shared working together. The current legislation that's before the Parliament deals with belief. And so it deals specifically with a issue of whether you sign up to a belief statement or not, rather than saying anything about someone's identity or their behaviour. It says in particular it deals with that. But because there are difficult cases, does not mean that we shouldn't promote the freedom of religious groups and religious institutions to be able to employ who they want to employ reasonably and with clarity about their doctrinal statements and doctrinal positions.
But Steph's sitting here tonight. What do you say to Steph, who is a Christian and still hold a Christian faith despite this experience?
Yeah, I've obviously had to rethink a lot of things, and I do believe that I have a very well-researched and well-thought-out stance on a lot of the Christian doctrines that I have believed, and some of which I continue to believe, and some of which I've changed my mind about. I think with good sort of academic backing, but yeah, it's troubling that the Christian community in Sydney broadly does not seem to be open to the fact that I can belong there too.
But that's an issue for the Christian community to talk about, and for you to contribute to that particular theological debate. But the issue at law is whether there is freedom for a particular community to express its identity in that particular way too, isn't it?
And Jason, that goes to the point of the legislation. I mean, this happened in your electorate, so Steph, the school was in your electorate. Is this the sort of thing we would see more of under this legislation, that a school would be able to say, you don't fit the ethos of this school, therefore we can fire you?
So Stan, the first point I would make is this occurred before this legislation was even written. So that's the first thing. And Steph, can I say to you that what you've gone through, no one should have to go through. So to the extent that it's not worth much, I'm sorry you've had to go through that. What I would say though about this legislation is that as a liberal, a philosophical liberal, I believe that the role of the state is to maximise the freedom of individuals, wholly consistent with the freedom of others. Now, we talk a lot in Parliament about the economy, about infrastructure, about climate change. These things are about the sustaining life. What Steph has gone through, what Steph believes, what people of faith believe, are the things that make life worth sustaining. The role of any government is to ensure that those things are protected, because if our nation is to mean anything, people need to be free to express themselves within that context. What we are trying to do here is very difficult because, as I'm sure Andrew is about to tell everyone, you have intersections where where you have faith coinciding with people's personal identities and beliefs. They are difficult things. They need to be encoded in law so that people are protected and so that those freedoms are ensured.
Let me bring in Andrew. And the point being here, Andrew, is that there is a, federally there are laws against discrimination on the basis of race or gender or sexuality, but not religion. Something is missing, isn't it?
Well, I think religious protections are well covered within state and territory anti-discrimination law.
But not federally, and that's the point here. And
not in New South Wales.
And not in all states.
Or South Australia.
So is there a need, is that the piece that's missing? If you can be protected for discrimination against on the basis of race or gender or sexuality, why not protection of religious expression?
Well, that's a fair point, but it depends on how it's framed. So I would suggest look at the ACT Human Rights Act as a very effective way to provide those religious protections. But to Steph's question, I'm just so sorry to hear that, Steph. That's terrible. Come and teach in Canberra. You are really welcome in our city. We will value you for who you are and the wonderful professional skills you could bring to our education system.
Although
I'm sorry you've been discriminated against. It's terrible. It shouldn't happen.
Once that law, if it is indeed ultimately is passed in this form, would that not override the laws that you have in the ACT? And what recourse would you seek? Because I understand in Victoria there's potential of a High Court challenge. Is that what you'd look at as well?
Well, we'd have to consider our legal position. We're in a constitutionally weaker position as a territory, but we have a Human Rights Act and a Discrimination Act that provide excellent protection that for people of religious faith, but balance those rights and ensure that everyone is equal before the law. That's the sort of Australia that I want to live in, and in my part of Australia, in Canberra, that's the law, and that's where we're all equal before the law in the ACT. That's how it should be everywhere.
But Melinda, that goes to the nub of the issue here. We talk about equality, we talk about people being equal before the law. Let's wind this back a little bit and to the case that really got people fired up about this and what we've seen eventuate, and that is the Israel Folau case. Bit of background, is a rugby union player a Christian who had posted things about homosexuals, fornicators, adulterers, drunkards, on and on, who were going to go to hell, he said. They're condemned to hell. He then lost his job, effectively. Should he have lost his job for what was an expression of a fundamentally held faith? And how do you deal with that in a workplace environment?
Can I say firstly, just on the last question, I think this is one of the concerns I have with where we're at right now. And you're already seeing businesses and business groups sort of reflecting that they're not sure how this plays out and how they're going to deal with this and what the implications for them are as they deal with the laws and the regulations of this. If I come back to the Israel Folau issue, the question I've always had on that is, and it's a bit of my concern on this issue as well, around I think, I personally, philosophically, I'm in support of free speech as well, but I think it comes with a huge responsibility. And the question I've always had, quite frankly, about those comments is why? Why were you saying them? Why did they have to be said in that way? Where was the reflection on who you were talking to? Why you were making those statements? And where was the reflection on the potential impact and harm for people? And weighing those things up and balancing those things. So that's a little bit of my concern around where does the balance lie in this in terms of your responsibility to think about other human beings, the things that you're saying and how you say them. So I think it's a really fundamental issue.
Yaara, where do you sit on this? Israel Folau at the time had said he believed this was an expression of his faith, firmly held, and he said an expression of love. He said he wanted to save people and he felt compelled to say this. He stood by his comments. He ultimately paid a prize for that as well. We're all talking about these rights, these contested rights. Steph has paid a prize for this. And where rights are contested, where do we fall on free speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of your own identity in a pluralist, secular society that is still bounded by religion and faith as a central tenet of our societies?
I think Andrew Barr was right when he said that we're mostly covered when it comes to religious discrimination laws, and that was actually what was found by the Philip Ruddock government review on this very issue. He said we didn't actually need to do anything on religious discrimination. We're well covered. Now, Scott Morrison bringing this in and saying it was an election promise from 3 years ago.
Which he did get a mandate for. He won the election. He
also said 3 years ago that he was going to bring in a Federal Integrity Commission. I think Bridget Archer, the Tasmanian Liberal MP who crossed the floor today to support an independent proposal for a federal ICAC of sorts, spoke for many Australians when she said she found it offensive that we're prioritising a religious discrimination bill which is not needed when there are so many other pressing issues we could be looking at, like a Federal Integrity Commission.
It's certainly been a pressing issue for you, Steph. Do you think you've any clearer tonight after the discussion, or does it just raise more questions?
I have a lot of questions about it, Stan. May I address Reverend Dr. Jensen with my question?
Just quickly.
I've written this one for you, Michael. As a learned and experienced leader in the Sydney Anglican Church, do you believe it's okay for churches and Christian organisations like the school that fired me to be legally protected in excluding and denouncing certain people in order to preserve a very narrow interpretation of theological correctness?
Well, I don't believe it's. I don't think there should be protection for abusive behaviour or being you know. And I've got to say, I think the issue where you've experienced particular discrimination goes to the Sex Discrimination Act as well, which needs clarification. It's out. That's way out of date. I do think that Christian organisations ought to be able to teach traditional marriage, as traditional marriage has been taught by the majority of Christians over 2,000 years, and is still believed by many Australians. I think they shouldn't do that without compassion, and they shouldn't do that in an offensive or vilificatory way. But I do believe that they should be able to teach and hold to traditional marriage. Yes.
But no one's stopping them from doing it.
Steph, thank you so much for your question as well. Good luck with your teaching career.
We've seen stories week after week about politicians, now at the senior-most levels, receiving violent threats at an increasing rate. Aside from being a very serious safety concern, the threat of violence could chill free speech. What concrete solutions are there to bring back decency in public discourse? And how do we account for the role of social media in driving hostility in politics, given that algorithms are skewed to deliver content to us that outrage us?
Yeah, Yaara, you look a lot at technology and its impact on our lives and social media, and there's no doubt people have more access to other people, and the conversation, as Sanjay pointed out, is much more heated.
But I think we need to kind of understand, as Sanjay put really well, that social media platforms, and big tech in particular, they do have algorithms that are designed to keep you on their platform for as long as they can, really, in order to sell you things and push ads to you. And it doesn't matter what the content is that you're looking at. It's not about social cohesion. I don't care what you're watching. So long as you go down this rabbit hole with them and they can keep you there for as long as they can, then that's the sort of model that they have. And we've been hearing from whistleblowers like Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower who testified to US Congress, that companies like Facebook put profits over humans. And until we regulate these big tech companies and put stops on how these algorithms are basically designed to keep us there online, no matter what it is that we're watching, and creating this sort of outrage culture, then I think we're going to continue to see these problems on the streets play out.
Andrew Barr, you have dealt with this personally, haven't you?
Yes, a few fixated individuals. It's amplified in social media. And yes, it's confronting. It does lead you perhaps think twice about how how you approach your job. I guess I've had to learn to be a lot more resilient. You need a thick skin in politics, full stop. But things have crossed, lines that are just not acceptable. Not just for me, but for.
Is this threats of physical violence as well?
Oh yes, and I guess fixation, stalking, some behaviour that's pretty unsavoury. I haven't experienced the sorts of things I've seen. Some of my state and territory colleagues in Victoria, Daniel Andrews and Mark McGowan in WA, and Mike Gunner in New South Wales in the Northern Territory. It has just been an extraordinarily confronting period, and we just need to be unequivocal in saying this is not acceptable in Australia, and just calling it out, no ifs and buts. Or else I fear we're on a path that we've seen in the US and the UK, and that's not a place that Australia wants to be. And it happens to politicians on all sides of politics, and I don't think it's good for our democracy, and it's certainly not good for particularly the families of the politicians.
Michael Jensen, you've talked a lot about the need for kindness, or to be gentle. Gentle in disagreement, kindness to those who disagree with you. That is not our age, is it? No,
and it's exactly as Yaara says. It's the social media platforms. They get money from whipping up the debate. Trump was the best thing for Twitter, even though Twitter pretends to be woke. It's not, because it loved the right wing. It actually really loved that kind of tension and the extremists. It really profits out of that. It would help if politicians would tax them. That would be a good start to kind of properly tax these big surveillance capitalists. But we can do something too, and that is we shouldn't just rely on governments to do it. We, the Australian people, should be more active and engaged and in our political system, in our political debate, and actually produce the kind of conversation we want to see happening. Because most people do want a more gentle, a more kind of conversation.
That's why we have Q&A.
Stan, can I just... I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I'm just going to put a little positive note in here, possibly, and it's a little anecdote.
Please do.
Two of my daughters have actually just taken themselves off social media because they've just looked at the tone of it. And have just decided, of their own accord, without having any conversations with us, they just decided it was not the sort of tone and the way that they wanted to engage, and it was all consuming, and they actually took themselves off it. So I say hats off.
Is that something that a lot of you are doing? Is that something that a lot of you are doing right now? Put your hands up if you've taken yourself off social media. Hands up. Oh. There's a few. Can be addictive though, can't it?
I just use it for... I've got rules about it. So I use it to share information about things that we're doing at work, to connect people to ideas. It's always positive and it's always information, and I don't engage with negative. And I just ignore it. But I just think it's just a reminder that we can get caught up in it, but there are people out there who've got their antennas up. There are kids out there who are figuring this stuff out as well.
It's worth saying to the media as well that that I've seen more discussion of extreme views, and the more you give them oxygen, the more they have power. And I think there's a way in which the media has a role to starve the oxygen out of extreme voices.
So sometimes they can drive it underground and make it even more virulent, though, of course. Jason, we've seen in recent times Jackie Lambie's number, for instance, being handed out on social media. Should there be consequences for things like that?
Absolutely.
What consequences?
Well, the e-safe... this parliament, like Australia, leads the world in regulation of big tech, in particular around this information stuff. So the e-safety commissioner has the capacity to issue orders without having to go to court, so immediately take down orders. So things like Jackie Lambie's number being taken down,
and for Malcolm Roberts, there should be consequences. And
is that what he did? Is it?
Well,
is
that's what we've been. That's
reported. Well, in my personal view, absolutely, because the real issue of the 21st century, or I think one of the biggest issues in the 21st century, is going to be our right to our information and our privacy. Because if we are anything, it is who we are. And yes, we've shared all that, or a lot of people have shared a lot of that on social media, but we didn't give it away. and we should have a right to reclaim it. And if that isn't done in this century, then we will be looking at a very different species by the end of the 21st century.
The next question comes from Sarah Baker, who we should point out is an independent candidate in the upcoming local Northern Beaches election.
Thank you, Stan, and good evening, panellists. So my question is for Jason Falinski. When 5 Coalition MPs crossed the floor to support Pauline Hanson's vaccine discrimination bill, Scott Morrison said, and I quote, "The coalition isn't run like an autocracy and members are free to express different views." And yet when it came to supporting action on climate change, and you had the green light to cross the floor and represent your electorate's wishes on this critical issue, you decided not to. My question is, given you've been calling for more action on climate change, why do you lack the courage to cross the floor and represent your electorate?
We're in question time.
Wow. I'm just away from you.
I assume Melinda wants to answer that question. Sarah, thank you very much for that question. Look, in answer to your question, it's quite simple. One person cannot change the world. These things... So
you can change a vote on the floor.
You absolutely can do that. You can absolutely do that. But what I would rather do is get the Australian government to commit to net zero by 2050. What I would rather do is get an updated projection to 2030. What I would rather do is see our emissions fall by 20% from 2005 levels. What I would rather do is, if I go alone, I might go fast. But if I go together, I will go far. And my ambition for this country is to go a long way, not a short way quickly.
Jason, you've outlined your climate credentials. You've also been someone pushing for a tougher target for 2030.
Yep.
But you voted against protection of the Great Barrier Reef.
When?
Well, that's on the record, isn't it?
No,
I mean,
it's
yes,
not.
It is.
Oh, you're talking about this
Yes.
fake, this fake left-wing front group website that has misrepresented
Well, this
the
is
views.
the sort of thing Sarah's going to.
This is important.
This is the sort of thing Sarah's going to.
This is important.
The difference between what you say and how
this
they
is important. So there is a website out there. So what the Labor Party does is we will have a motion that increases funding on aged care funding. So the Labor Party will get to the second reading speech and they'll move an amendment. And I'll have things in there like, we want to increase it by 30% more, but Stan Grant is a bad person. And I could never vote for that, Stan. So I vote...
Thank you.
So I vote against that amendment. So this fake website puts up a vote that says that I voted against increasing aged care funding. It's untrue. You know, you've got people like Andrew Bragg...
It gives indicative votes. That's
No,
what
it does not give indicative votes. If you want to see votes, if you want to see how your Member of Parliament is voting, there is one absolute record that is verified, and that is Hansard. It's online. You can go and have a look at it. You can see how everyone voted. There is a fake website that is funded by, it is a left-wing front group. It is funded by people who are running campaigns against the Liberal Party.
Well, we'll take a look at that and we'll say that
for
next time, Jason. Our final question comes from Rebecca Clark.
Is the government acting in self-interest or the national interest when it spends the last 2 sitting weeks of the year and possibly of this term of government trying to rush through legislation to introduce voter ID and religious freedom, when many people say both of these bills are unnecessary and discriminatory, rather than legislation for a National Integrity Commission, which was promised by the PM over 3 years ago and many Australians, or the majority of Australians, want?
I might just go to you, Andrew, on this question of voter ID. I know you're not in the federal parliament, but one of the concerns here is that it leads to a voter suppression. Indigenous people, for instance, may not have accessible ID that they can show. Is that a concern?
Yes, it is. This is another solution looking for a problem. It's so clear exactly what they're trying to do here. And it's the sort of tactics that are used in the United States by Conservative parties to suppress the vote. That's what it's all about. It's very, very clear. Of course it is, Jason.
No, it's not.
You know it. We all know it.
I'll give Jason a chance to quickly respond.
Thank you.
Yes, Jason?
Oh, sorry, Andrew's... Oh, that was good. Well, firstly, can I address your question directly? Like, it's a nice slogan to say, why are we dealing with religious discrimination and voter ID laws before ICAC? Well, the truth is, voter ID laws have been proposed since the early 1990s. So if we want to play the game of what's been around longest, well, that's been around a lot longer than an independent commission against corruption.
When
if you
was
want to
Nick
talk
Bryner
about
sacked?
when you want to talk about when you want to talk about
wasn't it?
when you want to talk about religious discrimination, that promise has been outstanding for more than 4 years. We will do an integrity commission, an independent commission against corruption. It is there to be done. When it comes to voter ID laws, what Andrew is saying is absolutely wrong, and he is dividing the nation unnecessarily. Communities such as Indigenous communities, Stan, that you looked at, if you turn up with someone who knows you, who can identify themselves, all they have to say is, I know that that's Jason and I can vote. If I have no form of ID because I've been at the beach, all I have to do is sign a declaration form, which takes literally 30 seconds to do. If this is about voter suppression, then what Andrew Barr is saying and what the Labor Party is saying is Canada suppresses votes. The United Kingdom suppresses votes. The French, the Italians, the Spanish,
let's just get a
the
quick,
Greeks.
Let's get a quick comment from Melinda.
Actually, just want a question. I mean, this is an issue that has been raised by Indigenous communities as being a real concern to them around the impact that it will have on people. And the miscommunication of it. And let's remember that there are communities where people don't speak English as a first language in Australia, right? So my question is, to what extent have you had serious consultation with Indigenous communities about this?
So we have a $10.6 million program in place to engage Indigenous communities, mostly in remote areas.
But as you've thought about doing this, and given the fact that there doesn't seem to be a huge problem...
We're almost out of time, but we'll have to, if you can just quickly respond.
To Melinda's question, this proposal has been consulted for literally over the last 20 years. This is something that goes back nearly 7 years actively. JSCM, which is the Joint Committee on Election Matters, proposed this almost 2 years ago.
Okay. I might get a final comment from you, Michael, just to the overall question here about priority. Well,
I think the religious discrimination law has been on the table for a long time. It's actually more needed than people imagine. As I say, we need to bring the states together and have some cohesion. It's also not as dramatic as everyone thinks. That is, it is simply making national what is true in most states and not in some others. So I think a lot of the alarmist rhetoric about it is not correct at all. It goes to belief. There's need for more work on other discrimination legislation, I think. But this is undramatic legislation that tightens and tidies up and makes a statement about the affirmation of religious communities in Australia.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And that's all we have time for. Thanks again for all of your questions. And our panel, Yaara Melham, Michael Jensen, Melinda Cilento, Jason Falinski and Andrew Barr. And our fantastic studio audience. Give yourselves a clap as well. This is my last Q&A for 2021. I look forward to being back with you again next year, along with Virginia Trioli and David Spears. And next week, Virginia brings you our season finale. What a lineup. Singer Missy Higgins, comedian Arj Barker, broadcaster Narelda Jacobs, IPAs John Roskin and Hugh Van Cuylenberg from the Resilience Project. Something for everyone. Missy will be performing live for you as well. It'll take a lot to beat our panel tonight, don't you think? It would take a lot. Until then, take care. Have a good night.